Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show which about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Time Traveler's Wife. Great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I love that opening. I believe it was opening. I'm probably mixing events up in my head, which is kind of the perfect show to mix stuff up with time travel and everything. But, it's Henry at 38, and he's with Claire at 36, and she's drawing him. He's like, okay, I see it yet? And she's like, oh, no. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't be drawing me naked. She's like, how'd you know? He's like, well, I've seen the completed thing. And she's like, that's not fair. That's cheating. It's like, well, not really. I love that. Time travel shenanigans. But there's also a giggle he hears nearby, and it's like, she's like, oh, who is that? Like, oh, that's no one. And he's like, Claire, you can't hide it from me. I know what your family sounds like. I've met them. And he smiles and laughs about it a little bit. And she's like, what's so funny about that? It's just like, no, you are funny, Claire. So I think in the long run, he thinks back to the first time that they met, just the whole rigmarole of their relationship. So, and jumping ahead a little bit, now I'm assuming that giggle we heard was her sister Alicia back then. So, but jumping forward to 2008, we have Gomez and Henry hanging out. This isn't like their first hangout post finding out he's a time traveler. It seems like they've made attempts, but it's never worked out, and it still just blows their mind. It's like, how are we best friends? It's like, it doesn't make sense to me. It's very flabbergasting. And obviously, there's the back and forth. You know, he's still just being like, man, I'm a lawyer and you're a time traveler and you're the most interesting thing I've ever experienced in my life. My whole job is preventing really interesting things from happening. But then you have Henry pointing out the fact is that Gomez is into Claire, and he got offended by that, which I guess now later on he can finally admit that how he feels about Claire, that he is in love with her, but he couldn't admit it back then because Henry's saying all that stuff laid on some insecurity because he was trying to be like, no, me and Clarice, we're Charisse, I said Clarice, me and Charisse were great, so he didn't want, it would have imploded everything, and because him and Claire had made the promise of forgetting everything, which unbeknownst to him, Claire and Charisse did a thing, which unbeknownst to Charisse, that him and Claire, so it's like, neither one of them knows about, they both did something with Claire that the other doesn't know about, so. But, yeah, that kind of led to Gomez saying, right, I actually met you before just meeting you at 27 when you were drunk. I actually met you before. I'm like, whoa, wait, you have? I was like, wondering what that's all about. But Gomez was so pissed he decided not to say anything. So now Henry's got to go meet Claire's parents, and just kind of the awkwardness that's kind of associated with that. And even him wondering, oh, do you hate your parents? And she's like, why? He's like, you kind of live pretty far from them. Which I think is so interesting, because Henry's dad comes up in conversation this episode too, but we still don't talk about, because he referenced, in the episode where his mom died, him and his dad don't talk, and he's like, why would we? And I'm like, what is up with their relationship? Are they actually on a good relationship, and he just, or, I don't know, the fact is, he talks about his dad very little. Obviously, we learned so much about his mom and very little about his dad. We learned a little bit more about his dad. I mean, but even that's just based on information we kind of already knew about his dad, that his dad and his mom performed together and being a violinist. That's about it. But it's just regurgitating some information we knew. We didn't learn too much more about him, what his situation is present day and stuff. But I love that when they were in the grocery store, because the gas station. Well, they were having the whole conversation. For Henry, it's right, you like the older me and not the me. That is going to be me. And she's like, yeah, but it's almost like it's like cheating on the love of my life with his kid brother. And the guy behind him in line when they're leaving, he turns. He's almost like, what the fuck did I just overhear? And Gomez kept calling, but Henry kept ignoring him, and he picked up and was like, right, sorry about all that. And it's like, okay. He was like, should I tell you about the time I actually first met you? Will that mess with the time, the causality of time and stuff? And he was like, yeah, man, and Henry made a wisecrack. He's like, no, I'm only joking. And he just sarcasm is, being sarcastic and jokey like that is a defense mechanism for Henry. When you live the life of a time traveler, it's like, of course you're going to joke like that. Of course going to hit you like a bag of bricks like that, just because you have to find some way to kind of process and compartmentalize that. I mean, he's a time traveler since he was 8 years old. He's been time traveling since he was 8 years old, and it's just like, of course you gotta laugh at yourself, to laugh away the pain, essentially, you know? But what I also thought was kind of an interesting development for this too was the whole conversation about life not being what you... Well, Claire was talking about coming home, and the older version of herself was saying, like, right, you never... you kind of look at things the same until you have someone else, and you kind of finally see things through their view, their lens. So... Henry ends up meeting her parents, and he's trying to joke with them, but they're very like they're he's the funny man in the situation, and the entire family, the parents and her brother's such a dick, like this entire episode. Well, he was kind of like a snot-nosed brat, from what we got with him in the past, but he's such a jerk. I couldn't find the words, because I was about to say nerd, doofus, dork. Like, I couldn't find the exact word, so that's why I had to pause for a second. But, yeah, it's the back and forth that, them trying to get to know Henry, him being a librarian. It's like, oh, what do you want, what's your plans for the future? And he's like, oh, like, probably just that. And it's like, oh... Finding out that everyone's a lawyer. He's like, oh, my friend's a lawyer. It's, oh, who's your friend? He's like, oh, Gomez. It's like, well, we just call him Gomez. And it's like, right, because he doesn't actually know Gomez's name. And it's like, it's weird to call him your friend. You should be like, oh, I have an associate named Gomez I recently met. Like, but he just, you know, it's that complicated time traveler thing of like, right, you just met the dude fairly recently, and then you guys had this whole exchange and experience of him now knowing that you're a time traveler, plus you now know that he's going to be your best friend in the future. So there's glares to just everything that can possibly go wrong with this meeting the parents the first time goes absolutely terrible and wrong. And so... when Henry actually went to Claire's room, I actually thought it was going to be more of a shrine to older Henry than it was. Like, she had some stuff around, but her entire room wasn't dedicated to probably subtle things here and there, like the checkers game and such. But it's also the problem of, like, right, she has all these memories from 6 to 18 of hanging out with that older Henry. That's 12 years of that, whereas this Henry, it's like, right, he knows nothing about that. This is his first time being at Claire's home, and it's like, oh, is that the clearing? He's like, yeah, I thought it'd be bigger. She's like, well, yeah, everything looks bigger when you're small, but it's still very important. And that's when you start getting into the rub of it all, where it's like, this is where you really start, like, she's already been feeling this before now, and she's kind of made it clear, you know, but it always feels like she's kind of accepting, like, Henry as he is at 28, because she knows, like, right, I just gotta give him time, he'll eventually become the Henry I love. But for her, Henry, it's like, I'm in me. I am that, like, you know, yeah, she's like, yeah, I'll just have to wait for you to get older and stuff. But he's like, for him, it's like, that's the problem with you non-time travelers. You get so caught up on holding on to the past doesn't matter. Because for him, the past is gone, you can't change anything. Who would know that better than a time traveler, that you can't just drown yourself in holding on to the past? And the future isn't even here yet. All you have is now. Every day going forward is just that now, especially for Henry, because he knows at some point, I'm potentially going to die, and that's going to suck, and I don't know when it is, but it's not today. That mantra, that element has always kind of kept him sane, and it kind of applies. It's very applicable in this situation, but it's like, right, I'm here, Claire, you know, I'm here, I'm right now. We have right now, you and me. That's what should matter, because the past manages not to kill you, but the future definitely will. So all you have is right now. But even then, Claire couldn't necessarily, like, she was still struggling to kind of move past that, because once again, all she wants is to be with the Henry she fell in love with when she was a little girl. That's the Henry she wants to be with, but this Henry won't be him for a couple years, and it's that disconnect of, like, right, how could the man I love be this person? Once again, the problem with falling in love with a time traveler and meeting each other at a time, it's like she has all these experiences, which this Henry hasn't had those experiences yet, and it's just going to enlighten and grow their relationship in the future, where it's just kind of like, oh, she's like, oh, so where'd you go back to? It's like, oh, like 2008. She's like, oh my God, that's when we first met my parents. Yeah, what a disaster that was. It's like, yeah, and it deepens their relationship even more. Or like, oh, when'd you go back to? Oh, I met you at 16. It's like, oh my God, right. Oh, I was like, oh, or like, oh, you know, just like, oh, when he slept with her in the clearing, and he came back in time, and she's like, oh, you know, oh, we slept together, like, like that, it just deepens their relationship even more. So, but that disconnect, they haven't reached that point yet where it can deepen the relationship. Right now, that element kind of tears them apart, which is the beauty of this, where it's like the things that can kind of tear you apart right now are kind of what bring you together in the future. Timey-wimey business is it's kind of crazy when you just kind of think about it. It adds so many layers and complexities to like a romantic relationship. I mean, every relationship. I mean, look at him and Gomez's relationship, you know? But we also get introduced, you know, to an older Alicia who knows all there is to know about Henry, because apparently there was times where Claire apparently had to sneak him into the house during winter, and Alicia kept seeing a naked man downstairs, so she had to explain everything to her sister, which she's like, wait, you told her everything? Which I'm like, wait, why is telling your sister her sister an issue where you ended up telling Charisse, Gomez, well, and his ex already knew about the whole situation. But like, yeah, you told two people, you revealed your time travel stuff to two people at once. But it's like, right, I guess it's a little different because these are people who are going to become very important to you in the future. So I guess it's kind of not an issue. Well, because by that point, older Henry was like, right, Charisse and Gomez are like the best friends they're going to have. So it was already kind of like, right, they're going to find out eventually. Who knew that eventually would be now? So it's kind of like, why? I guess it's just how it all plays out anyway. So I guess it's just a different situation where it's like, right, with everything that was going on when you were younger, you told, because I guess he also knows, like, right, if you tell the wrong person, they would end up thinking you're crazy, but your sister just accepted it, which she was like, yeah, time travel is kind of like the more boring answer by comparison, so. And while he was getting ready for lunch, Henry time traveled and gets into it with a biker and fights him off, but then proceeds to get into an even bigger brawl with other bikers and gets the ever-living shit beat out of him. And then Gomez luckily shows up to his rescue and is like, yo, I'm a lawyer, that camera caught you, if I were you guys, I'd go the fuck home. And so it's 2022, so it's 12 years in the future. And Gomez would say, like, right, kind of ignore him, like my hairline or something like that. And it's like, right, he's like, right, 2008. Do we like each other yet? He's like, no. It's like, oh. And he did kind of like stop when Henry referenced Charisse, that I'm like, okay, so did they break up or did something happen to Charisse at this point in time? Because the moment he changed the subject, he was like, yes, you do like me. He completely changed the subject. So either like the truth came out, because it was like, I think the whole conversation was about like, right, I know that you're in love with Claire. You know that I'm in love with, that you were in love with Claire. And even Claire knows. Does Charisse know? And he stopped. So that made me go, what was that about? And maybe eventually it came out and Charisse, or maybe Charisse eventually was like, well, yeah, because she might, at the very least, she's bi. So maybe she found someone else that she was in love with. Maybe she kind of needed to move on from Gomez and, away from Gomez and Claire or something. I don't know. But then again, once again, Henry still considers her a close friend. But I'm like trying to remember now. Was the Henry in last episode was that him at 41 or was that him at like 38 or something? I don't remember now. Because that could be the big difference. Because the Henry, this is 2022, so Henry's about 40, 41. So if it was the same Henry, that might change the conversation about the whole Charisse thing. But if it's him at 38, that means, like, right, maybe whatever happened between, like, him, Charisse, Gomez, and everything, like, and Claire, like, maybe it hadn't happened at that point in time where that Henry is from. But in 2022, something did happen. Once again, either it was a fallout, complications, or maybe she died or something. I don't know. But I do love that, once again, meeting your friend at a time is what made you guys closer friends. Just kind of like, almost a little bit like the Henry and Claire situation. Because it's like, right, this is the guy who showed up here, had my back, you are my best friend. You're at least willing and able to admit, like, hey, you're in love with Claire, you know? And he finally admits when he saw, the first time he saw Henry was the drawing that she drew when she was 18. No, when she was 16, that drawing, that was the first time Gomez ever saw him. And it's like, right, if she's willing to draw you like that, that must mean that you're someone that she's deeply in love with. So I thought that was kind of had a beautiful element to it, saying that, but it, doesn't change the fact is that he's in love with her. But it's also, I think, because even Gomez started stressing the points of, you are still here. It's 2022. You are still here. And even saying that, like, he doesn't want his life without Henry. And Henry was almost like, why? He's like, because it would break my heart. Because legitimately he loves Henry. It's like, we are best friends, despite, you're coming from a time where we're not. It's such hard to believe. But for Gomez, where they are now, it's like, it's hard for me to believe, like, imagine my life without you either in it, So I thought that was a beautiful thing. And so he ends up giving Henry the address of where they are, give him the time frame, and then give that same time and no, it's like, write that down, give it to Gomez, and he has to show up here show up at that address 12 years later to help you out. So beautiful how that all works out like that. Because he was also bullshitting about the cameras, because he's like, of course there's no fucking cameras. And once again, I think the whole situation made Henry like Gomez more. It's like, all right, now I can see why I like you a lot, But going back to present day, and sadly Claire never, I think Henry made a point because he didn't want her to see him like that. Because Claire knows about some of the ins and outs of him time traveling, but she's never seen him banged up like that. And she made sure not to show her, because it's like, right, because it's a scary image that you'll never be able to get out of your head. Because I'm sure, like, for him, he doesn't want her to worry about him. It's like, right, if you see me like this, that's all you're ever going to worry and think about anytime I disappear for a bit. But once again, you'll always know it's not today. I'm still here. I'll come back to you at the very least. But the sad thing is, at some point, Henry won't come back to her. So he ends up kind of cleaning himself up as best he can. And while he was actually going, there was some interesting things where her life wasn't what she thought it was. Claire actually comes downstairs. She's like, wait, that fireplace, was it always fake? It's like, oh yeah. We always thought about, when we first got to build this house, we were always thinking about building one, but we just never did it. Then there's the whole thing with Nell, and Nell's like, that was that you or Alicia? You two were like running around, so I always forgot. And Nell's like, oh, do you want me to fix you something? She's like, no, you don't have to. It's like, no, you really don't have to. It's like, right, that's why they get paid for. And it kind of like stops Claire, because it's like, right, she even says, like, I told Henry you were the person I told all my secrets to. And now she realizes, like, that relationship wasn't what she thought it was. It's like, right, you were just, the person, like, right, you're just doing the job you were hired to. You aren't necessarily family, like, because now I think it made Claire go like, right, did you ever see us as a family, or were we just the people you were looking after? Maybe you care about us, sure, but it made her go like, right, like, when you're at such a young age, you see things a certain way, and now that she's older, she can kind of see them, kind of like the cracks in just everything. So then being at dinner, and it's like, oh, we can wait for him and such, and he comes downstairs, and they're trying to make excuses. At first she's like, all right, the reason why he's not coming down is because we had a fight. And then and she's like, well, it's not a real fight. And then he sits down, and he's like, right, sorry, Claire hit me. And they're like, oh my god. He's like, no, I didn't hit you. He's like, no, I was joking, she didn't hit me. And it's like, he has to lie about the falling in the shower, and then the fact is Claire has to go like, no, we didn't really fight, it was more so me being judgmental, and just the back and forth. Then like some family dirt starts coming up about how it's like, oh yeah, like Henry's situation is like, oh, my dad's this person is violinist, my mom was a singer, she died. And it's like, oh my god, this is your mom? We have some of her like music here and such. And it's like, oh, if your dad's a violinist, he could teach Alicia. But Alicia's like, no, I don't want to do the violin thing, I'm a hairdresser. So it's that thing of her mom doesn't like the job that she does, which is interesting. Well, just really quick, I mean, like, it's not like it's a grand coincidence or something, but I just think it's interesting. My sister, she does it as a side thing now, but my sister's main occupation back in the day was she was a hairdresser. Owned her own shop, like, back when I was in middle school, I think. Most of probably like parts of elementary school, mainly through middle school, I think. maybe parts of I think maybe parts of high school too. She used to own her own shop, but it's more like she has a different job now, and she mainly does it as a side business. But it just made me think about that. But it's that thing of, oh, you have children that do. It's like, no, but especially because they're all lawyers. The dad's a lawyer. I think the mom's a lawyer. I don't know if they really. I think they covered that. And like the son, Mark, he's a lawyer. So, and him constantly questioning everything and just being a complete another prick. It's like, I don't know why he feels the need to do that. So, and then Claire just finally snaps at everything. It's like, Mom, if your daughter wants to be a hairdresser, just leave her be, leave her alone. I'm an artist, and I'm marrying a guy who works I'm going to end up marrying a guy who works at a librarian. So, and also, Mark, you are she's like, fuck the fuck off. You're such an asshole. Who knew becoming a lawyer still wouldn't make you even more of an asshole than you already are? And she just had enough and leaves. And so Alicia and Henry were there for her. And Henry now sees the picture that she drew at 16 for the first time. And as Claire is running to the clearing, she sees, the area being like trash being dumped there, and just, it's not like, even at the point when she gets to the clearing, there's like some smokestacks in the distance. So it's been very industrialized. So as a young kid, she probably never really realized it, because as a kid, you see what you want to see. This is her beautiful, magical place that she got to meet with Henry. So all she ever did was focus on the good and never saw the bad. And now it's like, right now that you're older, you see so much less. I think see so much less of the beauty, because this place that used to be their spot, used to be so important to them, is now, look at it, it's trash, and it's just kind of like, right, I'll never meet the Henry I knew here ever again. That disappeared. Our last meeting was 2 years ago. Well, technically in that clearing, because she also met older Henry, in the apartment last episode, but still, the clearing is their very special place they've spent 152 times together. And to see it kind of reduced to what it is, and Henry gets his hair cut because he wants to be that person for Claire. And she realizes that she wanted to bring him to this place, kind of almost make it full circle, but she was almost like, right, isn't there some sense of deja vu? But it's like, right, how could he have any memories, even deja vu, for something he never experienced before? But, for her, she wanted to make it all come full circle. She wanted to show off the clearing to him, because this was their spot. But it's like, right, it doesn't even matter. But for Henry, it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter, because I'm here now. The Henry that you want to be here, it might not be here. He might not show up here anymore, but I am right here. Back to the whole focusing on the present. And so for her, it's like, right, despite everything, like, I did fall in, it wasn't just you him and fell in love with, it was you. The moment I saw you in the library, I fell in love with you. And so I think in the end, everything, kind of worked out, that it's like, right, if I can be that person. This is Henry letting go of that young childishness of who he is at 28, that fuck up, that screw. It's like, he's letting that go, and he's going to become the Henry that she can be in love with, the Henry that he can be proud of, I think. So that's where things kind of end. But it makes you wonder, obviously, there's still 12 years interactions with her family that, eventually makes you wonder what their other interactions will be like in the future. Will they ever find out about Henry's circumstances? Well, his dad, because I forgot, his dad definitely knows, because his dad ran into him, like, going down on himself when they were both sick, when both versions of himself was 16, but eventually her family's got to find out about, which that's going to be a roller coaster. Well, the rest of the family, and that's going to be quite the roller coaster. But because I thought it was interesting, because even Alicia was like, right, families, they're not perfect. Like, they fight, but there's still love here. Like, my parents are okay. Even Mark, she's like, he's okay. They might have their issues, but once again, it's because Claire had this picture of her family, because I think they gave you hints of this like early on in this series, maybe even the first episode when Claire's mom was taking pills and Claire brought her back like, Dad, Mom's taking her pills, and he's like, just go outside and play. Like it was just that thing of like, right, we just kind of bury our issues and pretend like everything's okay when in actuality we're not, and everything isn't. So kind of an interesting thing. Also, it kind of gives me the answer. I had wondered previously. I was like, all right, since we're doing all this past stuff, like, are we going to? I was wondering if this was going to be the episode and Henry would go to the future, and ultimately it is. Probably not as far into the future as I thought he would, because once again, it's typically, not always, but typically it stays within his own timeline. Technically, he talks about it kind of getting broke. That rule isn't 100% because sometimes he's going to times where his mom and dad are haven't even got together yet, so he got to see them fall in love, and eventually, so. But I guess it's still like the thing of it's technically part of your time because your parents getting together eventually makes you so. Nevertheless, I'm very interested to see where things take us. I could be mistaken because there's only supposed to be, I didn't know this, I thought it would be a little bit longer, but there's only 6 episodes, and I get the feeling like this might be a one-off, this might be a one and done, I'm not sure. Maybe there might be multiple seasons, or at least a second season, I don't know. I'm basing that on when I'm recording this, maybe I'll look it up afterwards, but the next episode is the finale, so what that means, once again, whether it's a finale, a season finale, I still feel like there's just so much story still in between. But I guess Henry becoming the Henry that he eventually becomes, I guess that's enough. And maybe we'll kind of jump around that. We'll probably like skip around that next 12 years over the course of this next episode maybe, and then get to the end result of whatever fate befalls Henry. I didn't talk about it, but I thought it was interesting that Henry talked about when he was like, "Oh, I'm kind of uncomfortable eating carbs." I was like, "Oh, I assume it's back to because of your mom dying in a car accident." But it was like, no, because if he's driving, if he's going at 60 miles an hour when he time travels, that basically he's going to keep that momentum going, and he's going to get flung into the splat on a wall or something like that, which is definitely that's jacked up. Once again, just the interesting elements to time travel. I think some stuff comes over, but not everything ever really covers that about like being in motion and stuff like that. But regardless, we'll have to see where the next episode, potential finale, potential season finale, takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.